He thought I was sleeping upstairs, but I was listening, and it changed everything. The night before my wedding, I couldn't sleep. Nerves, excitement, or maybe something deeper, something instinctive. So I got out of bed, wrapped myself in the old blue robe Harrison said made me look soft, and wandered downstairs to grab some water. That's when I heard his voice. He was on the patio, laughing, loud, arrogant, careless. I froze in the hallway, half hidden behind the curtain. And then I heard my name. That's when my heart started to crack. "She's just a placeholder, man," Harrison said. I'll never forget the way he said it. Nice enough, pretty, but temporary. Once the deal goes through and things settle, I'll upgrade. My breath caught. My knees buckled. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But then he kept going, bragging about how well-trained I was, how I made him look stable to investors. "She'll keep the books warm until someone better comes along." That's when I was nothing to him became more than just a feeling. It became a fact. She cried in silence that night. I did. In the dark, behind that hallway curtain, while he and his best man drank whiskey and laughed about my vows. I remember gripping the edge of the console table just to stay upright. The pain wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. The wedding dress hanging upstairs, the final fittings, the seating chart I stayed up until 3 a.m. fixing, all of it, a stage for someone else's script. But something shifted inside me that night, something I didn't expect. I didn't crumble. I didn't storm outside and slap him in front of his friends. I went back upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and stared at my reflection for a long, long time. And then I smiled, a small, steady, terrifying smile, because suddenly I knew. He thought I would stay quiet, hurt, maybe even grateful he hadn't left yet, but he didn't know me at all. The next morning I pretended nothing was wrong. I let the makeup artist paint my face, let my hair be curled like a doll's, let the photographers snap candid shots while I gazed out the window. But inside, I was building a plan. She planned it all, and this time, I was her. The version of me who wasn't afraid of losing a liar, the version who wasn't about to hand over her life to someone who wore masks better than tuxedos. I texted my assistant mid-makeup. "I need access to Harrison's business files. Today, quietly." She didn't ask questions. She knew that tone. Within hours, I had what I needed to start pulling threads. His offshore account names, shady documents, a signature that wasn't mine on a prenup I never saw. I didn't just find the messages. I found the money. He broke me first, that's true, but only once. After that, I built armor out of spreadsheets, timelines, and screen recordings. I had 24 hours before the wedding, and I wasn't going to waste a second, because if I was walking down that aisle, it wouldn't be to say, "I do." It would be to say, so I showed him the proof, in front of God, his mother, and every guest he invited to witness my erasure. By dinner time, I had everything I needed, and for the first time in days, I felt calm, not peaceful, focused. There's a difference. I laid out every file, every screenshot, every bank transfer like puzzle pieces on the floor of my childhood bedroom. And I smiled again. Not because I was happy, because I was ready. The girl he mocked behind my back, she wouldn't be showing up to that altar, but someone else would. Someone with a flash drive tucked in her bouquet, and a front row seat reserved for the SEC. He built a web of lies, but I traced every thread back to him. That morning, while everyone else buzzed with pre-wedding excitement, I disappeared into the shadows of our shared life. I wasn't the blushing bride. I was an analyst, a strategist, a woman with a mission. I still wore the ring. I still smiled in the mirror, but inside, I had flipped a switch. She planned it all, and every hairpin, every breath, every thank you was a step closer to detonation. I started with the cloud accounts. His, mine, ours. Harrison never changed his passwords. Too arrogant, too certain he couldn't be caught. In 2 clicks, I was inside. I found the messages, not just flirty exchanges with his mistress, but emails with legal advisors, shell corporations, even lawyers drafting contracts I had never seen. He wasn't just planning a life without me. He was using me as cover for fraud. Buried in his sent folder were contracts signed with names I didn't recognize until I checked the registries. Fake partners, inflated valuations, property transfers through offshore entities. I took screenshots, created folders, labeled each one. Every digital footprint became so I showed him the proof in progress. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was evidence. The offshore accounts were next. He used an old business account once managed by his late uncle, something he thought I'd never connect. But I did, and I tracked every wire transfer to a location in the Caymans. He betrayed me, yes, but he also betrayed his board, his investors, and every person who ever trusted the ethical heir of the Montgomery firm. I reached out to Claire, Harrison's sister. We weren't close. but I remembered the moment she looked at me once and said, "If he ever lies to you, call me." I called her, sent a sample of what I found. There was a long pause. Then, "Send everything. I'll handle legal. You handle the ceremony." That's when I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. By mid-afternoon, I had copies of prenups, hidden stock certificates, and contracts designed to funnel funds through phony charities. I forwarded them all to my encrypted backup. This wasn't about revenge, this was about preservation. I was deceived, but I refused to stay blind. I wouldn't let this wedding become a crown on a coffin of corruption. The florist arrived. So did the band. I smiled, thanked them, offered tea. No one suspected a thing. He thought I would stay emotional, irrational, spinning in doubt, but I'd stopped crying. My grief had shape now. Strategy, structure. I was no longer heartbroken. I was building a case. I even wrote a speech that looked like vows, polished, poetic. He'd never read it. He wouldn't ask. But inside that speech were timestamps, corporate figures, email excerpts. It looked like love, but it was layered with justice. My silence was my answer until now. But when I stood at that altar, the silence would end. And as the clock inched toward tomorrow, and my dress hung neatly in the closet, I looked in the mirror once more, not to admire the bride, but to meet the woman who was about to bring down a legacy with grace. He walked to the altar expecting applause, but left in handcuffs and shame. The church was glowing, stained glass casting soft hues of gold and rose across white roses and satin runners. Guests murmured, waiting for my entrance, oblivious to the truth dancing in my bouquet. I stood just beyond the doors, heart steady, fingers wrapped around something colder than pearls, a hidden flash drive. I took one final breath and told myself he never saw it coming, and that was the point. As the music played, I walked down the aisle with a grace I didn't feel. Every step echoed louder than the last, not with fear, but with purpose. I saw Harrison's smug smile, so confident, so undeserving. He winked. That was the last time he'd ever look at me as prey, because today the predator would be unmasked by the bride he underestimated. We stood before the officiant. He reached for my hand. I let him. One last illusion before the curtain dropped. When it was time to exchange vows, I stepped forward. "Before I read mine," I said, "there's something I need to share with all of you." I turned to the guests. "I was nothing to him," I began. "And now, you all deserve to know why." Gasps rippled as I pulled the small mic from my bouquet and pressed play. Harrison's voice filled the church, recorded, laughing, calling me a temporary choice. Then came the next slide, emails projected on a nearby screen, fraudulent signatures, shell company transfers, fake charitable donations redirected to offshore accounts. She exposed him wasn't just a headline, it was unfolding live. The officiant stuttered. Harrison lunged for me, whispering, "What the hell are you doing?" But I stepped back. "So I showed him the proof," I said clearly, and turned to the back of the church. That's when the SEC agents entered. 3 suits, badges flashing, walking straight down the center aisle like they belonged in every pew. The silence was deafening. "You're under investigation for securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction," one agent announced. Harrison laughed at first. Then the cuffs clicked, and his smirk collapsed. The truth came out, not in court, not in whispers, but under chandeliers and petals, and the eyes of everyone who once called him a role model. His mother screamed. His best man froze. Claire, his sister, stood up slowly and began clapping. 1, 2, 3. The rest didn't follow, but they watched. They watched as the groom was led out of his own wedding. "You'll regret this," he shouted. I didn't respond. My silence was my answer, and this time, it spoke louder than any vow. I turned to the officiant. "No ceremony today, but feel free to keep the flowers." Then I walked out, veil trailing, heels clicking on marble like the final punctuation, mark in a sentence that took years to write. Outside, I removed the ring and left it on the gatepost. This wasn't the beginning of a marriage. It was the start of something far more powerful. And when I opened the car door, Claire was already inside, ready for what came next. And what came next was everything. He built his empire on secrets. I built mine on truth. The morning after the wedding that wasn't, the media erupted. Headlines splashed across every news site. CEO arrested at altar in corporate fraud sting. My inbox flooded, some with pity, others with praise. But the one that changed everything came from a quiet firm in DC. "We saw what you did. We'd like to talk about ethics reform." That's when it hit me. Betrayal had left a wound, but it also opened a door. Claire called me that afternoon. I expected tension, maybe guilt. Instead, she said, "You were the only one with the guts to do what the rest of us whispered about for years." She offered access to internal files from the Montgomery Group, ones she'd quietly backed up over time. And Diana, Harrison's mother, sent flowers with a note. He broke me first too. I didn't reply, but I kept the card, with Claire's help. I founded a consultancy, Integrity First. It started small, just me, my laptop, and a mission. But the story had already gone viral. Women from boardrooms, startups, family businesses, they reached out. Survivors of hidden empires and glass cages, stories of betrayal poured in, and I listened. I built training modules. I wrote policies. I created frameworks that taught corporations how to spot manipulation, not just financial, but personal. People assumed I'd be bitter. I wasn't. I was focused. My silence was my answer to those who doubted me. My work was my revenge. Harrison's arrest dismantled the company's leadership, but instead of letting it all burn, Claire stepped up. With Diana's reluctant blessing, she restructured everything: new leadership, transparent accounting, whistleblower protection. They didn't ask for applause, they just worked. And for the first time, Montgomery Enterprises meant something. Meanwhile, I was asked to speak at panels, conferences, even universities, not as the girl who was left at the altar, but as the woman who rewrote the altar altogether. She finally left, one headline read, and turned the fall into a foundation. I smiled when I saw it, because it was true. People still brought up Harrison's name. I didn't flinch. He betrayed me, I'd say, but he taught me exactly who I never want to become. The contrast became my compass, the memory, my motivation. He built illusions. I built systems. He chased wealth. I chased worth. Diana eventually joined our advisory board. Quiet, humbled, wiser. And Claire, she became my co-director. Together, we weren't just correcting the Montgomery name, we were redefining it. And it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring integrity where deception once reigned. Because the girl who walked down the aisle in silence walked into boardrooms with fire. And while he faded into the pages of criminal history, I wrote the first chapter of something real. And it was just getting started. They tried to write my story in shame, but I rewrote it in strength. Change didn't happen overnight. It came slowly, like light creeping in under a door that had been locked for too long. I watched as firms who once distanced themselves from me began quoting our ethics policies. Our firm's training modules were adopted by Fortune 500s. CEOs who laughed at my story started requesting audits. That's when I knew. This wasn't just personal justice. This was redemption with ripple. Effects Claire became a powerful force. She didn't just rebuild the Montgomery name, she redefined it. Transparency, employee protection, equity in leadership. The boardroom that once mocked my presence now reserved seats for women like me. She planned it all wasn't just a phrase they used against me anymore. It was a compliment whispered in admiration across closed doors. Harrison pled guilty. I didn't go to the sentencing, but I got the call when it was over. 7 years minimum, Claire said. 15 if he violates terms. It didn't bring closure, but it brought accountability. He never saw it coming. Not from the altar, not from the courts, and certainly not from the woman he once dismissed as convenient. Then came the unexpected twist. Rebecca, his mistress, flipped. She turned state's witness in exchange for immunity, handing over hard drives, internal notes, even voice memos of Harrison bragging about his manipulations. For years, I thought she was just the affair, but she was also another pawn, betrayed, replaced, silenced. She cried in silence too, and now she was speaking. I met her once. Quiet coffee shop, no press, no theatrics, just two women who'd been used by the same man. I was deceived, she said. I nodded. We both were. But the difference now? We weren't pretending anymore. She started volunteering at a rehab clinic. I made sure her testimony stayed sealed. Revenge didn't need to be cruel. It just needed to be complete. I moved to a new place. Smaller, simpler, full of light. I filled the shelves with books and fresh plants. I didn't need chandeliers or gala gowns to feel powerful anymore. I needed peace, and that peace came from knowing that he broke me first. But I built myself back stronger. Universities invited me to speak. Law students asked about ethics loopholes. HR teams requested policy reviews. And through it all, I told them the same thing. If your foundation is built on secrets, it will eventually bury you. They listened. Because now, my name didn't echo in scandal. It echoed in reform. Claire, Rebecca, even Diana, women from opposite ends of betrayal, stood beside me at panels. One photo of us went viral. From victims to voices. That's what the caption read. And for once, it wasn't overblown. We had become voices. Loud, unapologetic, clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation, of truth, of trust, of self. And the next chapter? It wouldn't start with heartbreak. It would start with something real. He played the role of partner, but Marcus simply showed up and stayed. Love didn't come back to me wrapped in fireworks or dramatic speeches. It came quietly, in a lecture hall, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was invited to speak about corporate accountability. Marcus was the professor moderating the panel. He introduced me with no frills, No flattery, just respect. She exposed him, he said, but more importantly, she rebuilt herself. That was the first time a man's words didn't feel like a performance. We talked after class, not about heartbreak or betrayal, but about ethics, governance, and literature. He quoted Baldwin. I countered with Angelo. No tension, no games, just mutual admiration. And that night, when I got home, I realized something had shifted. He didn't look at me like a symbol. He looked at me like a person. I was nothing to him, not in a dismissive way, but in the purest sense. I was no object, no pawn, just me, Marcus. Never asked about Harrison unless I brought it up. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't treat me like a project. He simply showed up, listened, remembered small things. You always close your laptop 3 times before you're done, he once said, smiling. It's like you're telling it goodbye in chapters. That's when I knew this was different. He thought I would stay broken. But Marcus never saw me that way. We dated for 2 years. No scandals, no grand reveals, just real life. Cooking dinner, walking in the rain, arguing about what makes a character redeemable. He met Claire and Diana. They loved him. Even Rebecca, now running a support nonprofit, gave her approval. He's a quiet one, she said, but his silence isn't hiding anything. Yours used to be. The proposal was simple. No ring flash, no photographers, just us on a rooftop, watching the city breathe. I don't want to promise perfection, he said. I want to promise presence. I said yes, not because I needed to be saved, but because I finally found someone who didn't need to save me to love me. We married in a garden library, surrounded by books, candles, and 20 people who had seen every chapter of my story. No altar, no aisles, just a circle of trust. Claire officiated, Diana cried, Rebecca gave a reading, and when I looked Marcus in the eyes, I didn't see fantasy, I saw home. She finally left years ago, and this time, she walked toward someone who truly stood still for her. I wore a simple white suit, no veil, no lace, just confidence. And as we read our vows, honest, direct, unfiltered, I thought about that girl behind the hallway curtain, crying in silence. I wanted to hug her, tell her this moment would come, and that when it did, it would be soft, not loud, not sharp, just real. Marcus and I built a life on early mornings and shared purpose. He helped refine our consulting firm's curriculum. I edited his lectures on ethical leadership. We debated, collaborated, and laughed. Not once did I feel smaller in his presence. Not once did I have to shrink to be loved. And when I asked him, months later, what made you fall in love with me, he said, because you didn't ask for anything but honesty. That was all I ever needed. And this time, I received it fully. He left me with lies, but I left the world with truth. Motherhood wasn't part of the plan. Not originally, not after everything, but life has a way of surprising you when you finally let go of the weight. Our son, Eli, came into the world with the quiet strength of someone who'd waited for the right time to arrive. When I first held him, I didn't think of Harrison. I didn't think of the wedding or the lies. I thought of legacy, the kind that heals instead of haunts. We never kept the past a secret. Marcus and I chose transparency, even with Eli. When he's older, he'll know the truth. The truth came out long ago, and it will keep coming out, in pieces, lessons, values. I want him to understand that silence isn't weakness, that it can be armor or prison, and that my silence was my answer until it wasn't anymore. One day, while reorganizing a storage box, I found the Montgomery pearls, white, delicate, and cold. Harrison gave them to me the night before the engagement party. I hadn't worn them since, but instead of throwing them away, I did something different. I donated them to the Foundation for Corporate Ethics. They melted the gold, repurposed the clasp, and now it sits in the center of their new seal, a symbol of reform, born from betrayal. Claire stood beside me at the unveiling. She said, "He would have hated this." I smiled. Good. We both laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was release. Harrison's choices, his actions, he broke. Me first. But he also gave me something he never intended. A reason to fight for better systems, stronger voices, and louder truths. I got a letter from him last winter, handwritten, measured, apologetic. He said prison stripped him down to who he really was, that he now counsels young inmates about ethics, accountability, and ego. I read it 3 times before I responded. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, I wrote, but it is freedom, for both of us. And that was the truth, not a soft one, but a clear one. She cried in silence once, many times, but now she speaks in legacy, through every policy we help write, through every board we help restructure, through every woman who walks into our program thinking she's ruined, and walks out ready to rewrite her narrative. Marcus and I raised Eli not to be fearless, but to be aware of power, of choice, of silence. We read to him from Baldwin and Morrison, teach him about systems, fairness, and empathy, not because we expect him to fix the world, but because we expect him not to break it further. The foundation grew. What started as a post-scandal consultancy became an institution, scholarships, training centers, legal aid clinics, and through it all, my name remained attached. Not to Harrison, not to the Montgomerys, but to a mission that outlived the drama. I was deceived, yes, but I became something no one expected, unstoppable. And when Eli asked one day, "Why don't you ever wear the pearls, Mama?" I smiled and said, "Because the most valuable thing we carry is what we choose to leave behind." And I chose truth. He tried to control the ending, but I wrote the final chapter myself. I get asked all the time if I've moved on. It's a strange question, really, as if healing were a destination, not a rhythm. But yes, I've moved through it. I've moved with it. I've moved because of it. Harrison's name doesn't carry weight in my voice anymore. His choices, his downfall, even his redemption, they're not mine to carry. He begged her to come back, but I was already too far ahead. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetfulness. I remember everything, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. He thought I would stay small, stuck, maybe even grateful for scraps of affection. But I grew so far past what he ever imagined. I don't think he'd recognize me now. And that's exactly how it should be. Marcus and I continued building, not just a family, a mission. We launched the Global Ethics Initiative, partnering with universities, corporations, nonprofits. Claire became our operations lead. Diana, she funds scholarships anonymously. Rebecca runs one of the trauma recovery circles. We don't need press. We need results, and they keep multiplying. We're invited around the world now. Panels, audits, reform councils. Not because we're perfect, but because we're relentless. We don't just talk ethics, we live them. She exposed him years ago, yes, but what she really did was expose a system that let him thrive. And now, that system's cracking open from the inside. Every time we stand on stage, I think about that girl behind the curtain, the one who overheard her own undoing. She cried in silence, thinking it was over. But silence wasn't the end. It was the reset, the inhale before the roar. That moment taught me that pain is a map, and if you follow it with purpose, it leads you somewhere powerful. Harrison writes, sometimes, small updates, reflections. He teaches now, inside the system that once fed him. He talks about manipulation, accountability, how pride dismantles empires. I read his words with curiosity, not connection. Because he betrayed me, yes, but I am not his echo. I am not his aftermath. My name stands alone now, no longer attached to scandal, or pity, or whispered apologies, but to policy, to progress, to impact. And every time I see a woman walk into our space with trembling hands and a story she thinks no one will believe, I know exactly what to say. Nobody believed her maybe, but we will. Legacy isn't about erasing the past. It's about transforming it. I was deceived, and it hurt, but I built something sacred from the wreckage, something that lives beyond me, beyond Harrison, beyond betrayal. Revenge was never the point, but truth was always the mission. So when people ask how the story ends, I smile and say, it doesn't, because when a woman finds her voice, the story doesn't end. It multiplies.